The Court of Azathoth reviews The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft. All right. Hello, and welcome to a new podcast centered around Lovecraftian fiction. My name is Reese, and I'm being joined by my co-host, Zach. And
howdy.
Yes, and we've been meaning to do this for a bit, or at least I have, and I brought along a hitchhiker, because I didn't want to do it alone. I've been long wanting to talk about Lovecraft, his stories, his effect on popular media, and everything that goes along with that. And I thought that there would be no better place to start than reviewing some of the original stories. And we are going to do one of those today, and we should be doing something like that, or something similar to that, every episode, just to kind of go over plans for the future. There are a lot of things that are going to be open to being covered on this show, and that includes the stories of Lovecraft, stories that are set in the same universe by people like August Derleth and so forth, who kind of carried on the torch. I'm sure we'll get into some of the influences like Poe and the King in Yellow and things of this nature, and not to mention the wealth of content of 100 years that has been touched by this. And I think that is a subject that has long been demanding some sort of coverage. But anyway, what do you think about that, sir?
I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's a good start.
It's a good mission statement.
It is
right out the gate.
It is a good mission statement. I enjoy it.
What was your first encounter with Lovecraft?
So I was probably introduced before I even knew what Lovecraft really was. I was introduced to Lovecraftian, at least, or Eldritch horror, fairly young. There are a lot of games, obviously, that I've played that are influenced by Lovecraft, but more importantly, some books. One of my early, my first steady girlfriend, I think, from high school, was really into Lovecraft. She used to read a lot of those books, so I picked them up. The first book I ever actually sat down and read was The Mountains of Madness, and I was kind of hooked after that. I really like the psychological horror. I like I'm really into when they're done right. I really like ghost movies, especially possession flicks, but they're really difficult to pull off really well. But I really like this, the hopelessness, the psychological, am I crazy, or is any of this real, or is it all in my head, that the Lovecraft just evokes in your head? Just the way that he explores the psyche is really just fascinating to me. It's always been one of my favorite aspects of his writing. And in fact, the short story we're reviewing is an excellent example of that. You can tell it's one of his earlier works, and I'm really excited to get into it. It's going to be a good read. It was a good read.
Yeah, I'm going to be, this is a good chance to go through these, to reread some of the ones that I've obviously already read, and to read some of the ones that I haven't read. This was one that I had never read before.
Yeah, this was a new one for me too. I think I kind of vaguely remember maybe reading it once. But that could have been, I have a lot of Lovecraft stories on Audible, so I just listen to them on audiobook. And I have whole collections. There's like whole collections on there for fairly cheap. I think they only really pay for the narration. And
well, I'm glad we're doing the same approach, because I listened to it. I listened to an audio recording of this as well.
Yeah,
because I appreciate the kind of radio show atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the voice that goes with those is always better than the voice in my head, which is not as nearly as dramatic or eloquent. But I'll be interested going forward to, because you're right, this is obviously an earlier work, and I want to compare it to other stories, and I want to see where the writing style goes. And I thought that was this was the place to start. We're gonna see Lovecraft's career from pretty much the beginning to pretty much the end, and it's kind of a complicated timeline, to be honest. There's stories that we could have done that are kind of considered juvenilia, but these are like from like the first one that's not even complete is from when he was 7, which obviously, okay, we're probably not going to review what a 7-year-old wrote. But it's interesting because this seemed to be a really good jumping on point, because there is a break. Before this, if my chronology here is correct, the last thing he wrote was called The Alchemist in 1908, and The Tomb was written in 1917. So at this point, Lovecraft is an adult, and he's taken on writing again. It's also an issue with Lovecraft because he was extremely critical of his own work, and a lot of it has been deleted and lost to just time. A lot of the things that we'll also be covering in the future were published posthumously. That's something else to keep in mind. So I guess based on the schedule that we have going forward, I'm mostly looking at when the story was written to be the order we go in versus when it was published. And
I'm okay with that.
There might be things we miss, and if we do, people can call us out and we'll get back to it. And by no means we are not we're not bound to anything, and I'm sure we're going to throw in other things even as soon as the next edition. We might do something totally different. But I did think that this was a good place for us to start.
Yeah, I agree.
I pretty much have the same experience as you. I don't think I'm remembering the first story I read. It was probably, actually, you know what? I think it was The Rats in the Walls was the first one I read.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And I read, and it kind of just blossomed out from there. I obviously read Call of Cthulhu, Color Out of Space. I read a lot of these. But I, like you, had already been introduced to it culturally in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a fan of any kind of horror, science fiction, fantasy, it's impossible to avoid. You're going to see the influence pop up at some point, and once it's almost this spiritual journey to connect the dots and be like, oh, this is actually where that came from. It's almost it's discovering fictional roots, discovering it, because honestly, what we're reviewing here and what might make it difficult to review a lot of these stories is these are vital pieces of American history.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, well, how do you even approach that? Because, not that I'm critical of this story, but maybe there'll be a story that I don't like, but you have to take into context when it was written, how important it is for the genre, how important it is for just literature in general. There was this guy at the beginning of the 20th century trying something new. He had some different kind of ideas, very different than what everyone else was doing. And he didn't receive a lot of praise or commercial success in his time, but since then has become one of the most influential literary figures ever.
Exactly.
And that's a story of inspiration that so many people gravitate toward now.
It's very true. Very true.
Did you have any feelings about the genre now? Like, was there anything that has been recently released or will be coming soon that obviously has the influence that interested you?
There's going to be a Mountains of Madness movie releasing.
Really? Is it?
Yes.
Okay, I actually haven't heard about this. Go ahead.
I actually might look it up real quick just to make sure that I'm being accurate here.
Because I know that they're in the pre-production of the Color Out of Space movie.
Yeah, At the Mountains of Madness, IMDb. Let's see here. I can't remember who they've got slated to direct it. But the guy was so excited. He said that he was going to put all his other projects on hold. That this is basically the movie he'd been wanting to make his entire life.
Oh, it's got to be Del Toro then.
Yeah, it is Del Toro.
He actually, because he got the project. That's crazy.
I think so. Yeah.
Holy fucking shit.
Yeah. So this is a movie that I'm actually looking forward to. I don't get to say that a lot.
The story behind the production hell this movie has been in is almost worth its own podcast.
Probably worth its. Yeah.
He's been trying to do this for like fucking 15 years.
Yeah.
Huh.
I wish I could exactly.
Is there any other information you've heard about?
Just who's directing. Gosh, I feel like because I was talking to my programmer about this, and he's as into this stuff as we are, and I think he was the one who told me, but I can't remember where he got his information from. I remember reading it somewhere. But the IMDb page is like empty, so. But
if it's in production, it's got to be early.
Yeah.
Production.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where they talk about it for so long, it's hard to say. For sure.
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro reveals Mountains of Madness, or finally make At the Mountains of Madness. Yeah, there's a few articles here about it.
Okay. Because they were hoping to make this movie around 2011, 2012, and there were a lot of factors that made studios not want to do it. They were put off, and I'm hoping that he gets his full vision. He wants to make it R-rated. Mm-hmm. He wants to make it a black and white period piece.
Ooh.
These were things that the studios were very nervous about. They were also the other things that put them off were a couple of movies that got released around that time. There was the Thing prequel, which they basically didn't want another movie set in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And The Thing is obviously an homage to At the Mountains of Madness.
Right.
In a million different ways.
Yep.
The other movie that put them off was Prometheus had just come out, and that's a movie where humans go to discover an alien race and learn that alien race might have had some part in creating them. Again, another movie that is a prequel to Alien, so an entire franchise that is obviously heavily inspired by the Lovecraft mythos. I found it really ironic that these two extremely popular franchises that were clearly influenced by Lovecraft ended up being the undoing of Lovecraft's adaptation. It's like seeing your children go farther than you,
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's cruel fate in a way, but I'm glad to see that he might be finally getting his dream project, because I can't think of it,
I can't think of anyone better to do it.
It's
either.
having a fanboy directed. Like, it's no one's going to treat it better.
Exactly. No, I've been that's like probably the biggest thing that's coming out of like current events in the genre right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a lot of other stuff. that's going on.
I did
There
have a
was
few if you wanted to
okay.
get into them.
Oh yeah,
So
sure.
so there's a game, I believe it's coming out in June this year, and it's called The Sinking City. And this is very, I mean, it's set in the universe.
Uh-huh.
It is a Lovecraftian game.
Right.
And a lot of people have compared it to the Call of Cthulhu game, which I think is had some good ideas, but overall could have been better, in
Uh
my
huh.
opinion. And I
Uh
think
huh.
this game looks more fleshed out. It looks more immersive in terms of what it's trying to do. You playing this detective character and having to explore, this side of the universe. So again, a lot of it is kind of not known at the time in terms of what's going to be in the game. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if people are interested, there's a cinematic trailer, there's a gameplay trailer, if that's your kind of thing. And when it comes out, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, I'll definitely look into it. Video games are
it
my
looks good.
bread and
It
butter. So,
looks very good.
um,
Um,
I was actually, and this isn't like, I don't know if this is a project I plan on following through with necessarily, but I always wanted to make a survival game, where you're on the island of Raleigh, or in the city, in the sunken city, and you have to survive there. I think that'd be a really cool game.
oh
But
man, that'd be intense.
these guys might have beat me to the punch. We'll see. I'll
Well,
definitely
it's
keep an eye out for it.
that's not the setting as far as I know. So
Oh, okay.
you could probably still make that game.
Yes.
You know, this game is set in a town that is not in the Mythos as far as I know. It's just kind of their own made up town.
Okay, so it's not Portsmouth. It's not
I think they called it
some.
Oakwood, something like that.
Huh.
Oak something. But obviously not California. But whatever. The other thing that I kind of alluded to earlier was there is the Color Out of Space movie is in pre-production.
Oh yeah. That's awesome.
This one was interesting to me because at first I was kind of bitching about it, and then some people set me straight. And I was bitching about it because I was like, really, Nicolas Cage, like, but people said, okay, well, before you judge this movie too hard, or you think it's going to be bad, you need to watch Mandy. I had not seen Mandy before I was making those posts. I have since seen Mandy, and it's the same production company. I believe it's owned by Elijah Wood, actually.
Oh,
And so
really?
they're handling this film. A different director, but the same producers and same star. And Mandy is a trippy fucking movie. It is, I don't know if I would call it Lovecraftian,
Uh huh.
but it's not. These people are not hacks. I'll say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they have a very interesting vision, and I'm totally cool with seeing their take on this. And I really can't get all high and mighty because there actually have been film adaptations of this story that is my favorite. I'll just say that right off the bat as well. Maybe that will change by the time we're done doing all this though. Maybe I'll have a new favorite. But I think that it'll be cool to see because this is really the first proper adaptation in a long time that I've seen come out of this.
Yeah.
The one thing that kind of makes me it's not a huge deal breaker because there is still a rural setting, but as far as I can tell, this movie is set in the current year.
Uh-huh.
So, I don't know if, I don't know. It'd be kind of weird if you were watching the Lovecraft story and someone pulls out their smartphone,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, but, maybe it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I read there was an audiobook I was listening to, a collection of other authors' Lovecraftian works. Um, there were a few of them that were modified renditions of stuff he'd written that was for like modern times.
Huh.
A lot of them were really good. One of them I think was a sequel just something Lovecraft wrote. I'll have to. I can't remember if it was a second Mountains of Madness story. This this couple finds themselves lost or shipwrecked on this like barren, like icy shore, and they're with a bunch of other people, and like they get picked off by these like Shoggoth creatures, and this couple is the last two, and they escape, and they hop on this plane. Like the continent itself, like starts coming after them and shit. It's really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that we'll get to cover in this podcast, so this will be fun.
Yeah, no, I'm very open to a lot of that, and yeah. I think it's interesting because I'm kind of willing to look over that the Nicolas Cage movie is set in the modern day, but I really want the At the Mountains of Madness to be period piece. Like there's just something about that story that it just wouldn't feel right otherwise. Yeah,
no, I agree. I agree entirely. They should definitely do everything they can to set it. At the very least, put it in the setting that it was written for. I like that they're getting that particular director for this role.
But if by all means, if people want to write, their Lovecraftian stories, and they're like new stories and they're set in the modern day, I don't have an issue with that at all.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, there's stories that are inspired that people have set in eras that are farther back than when even Lovecraft was writing them. Like Cowboy meets Cthulhu, like just whatever. That was the entire point of this genre, was to borrow ideas, was to build off of them, and to try something new.
I know there was some talk for a little bit about Toho maybe enrolling some of the Cthulhu Mythos creatures into Godzilla. That was something a lot of Godzilla fanboys were very eager to like see. Like they wanted to see Cthulhu versus Godzilla. Like that's a movie that needs to happen.
Hey,
it's really comparable because it's kind of the same thing. Godzilla, in a way, is an eldritch horror. He's a force of nature that like no human can do anything about. You just have to roll with the fact that he does what he does, So,
oh yeah. Those movies, I wouldn't maybe later on have an influence because they kind of evolved in their own cultural context.
Yeah,
I think away from Lovecraft in a lot of ways, but
yeah. Well, I mean, obviously they're only tangentially related in that I guess they have similar themes in certain instances, but they're not the same. They're way different in terms of like.
But if we're talking about, because there's the movie coming out this year, if we're talking about like American-made Godzilla movies, there's a definite influence.
Oh yeah,
hard to avoid.
Oh yeah, I can see that, especially with the Muto in the last film. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were kind of like giant bug creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a point. I think that it's nice seeing that in general, because if let's say that Guillermo del Toro's movie actually is finally happening in a decent schedule, that's a huge win for the genre.
Yeah, it really is.
Because he's a guy who directed movies like that. He directed Pacific Rim. He's a big-time director.
Yeah.
People will go see his movie just because his name is there. And it would be, I don't know, like, I feel like it would do for this mythos what Peter Jackson did for Lord of the Rings. Like, people knew what it was, but people really knew after those movies came out.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh man, I was among the first people in line, and there was people. The theater in my hometown they had people lined up around the block. I mean, it was a big building, and there were just people lined up all the way, just I couldn't believe the number of people that showed up. And like my friends and I were all LARPing out in our Lord of the Rings costumes and shit, just geeking out and having a great time. So yeah, if you can do for Lovecraft what Jackson did for Lord of the Rings, this is a writer that deserves praise. He doesn't for someone who's been so influential, he doesn't necessarily get the praise he deserves, and he even gets a lot of flack. But I mean, I know I actually had to take a class on different cultural influences in writing specifically, and Lovecraft was one of the many writers that we had to pick from to talk about. One big topic that came up a lot was obviously his racism. That was a huge hot button topic for a lot of people. Something that like I've never really put that much like emphasis on, because it's the least important aspect of his work. And so I don't like, yes, he was racist even for his time period. He was really racist, but he was also incredibly xenophobic and afraid of everything. Like, he had every phobia you could think of, and it's probably what killed him. So, I mean, he spent most of his life like secluding himself away from the rest of society, and basically just lived off his family's wealth.
Not unlike the protagonist of our story,
right?
I wasn't the only one who noticed the
no. That was one of the first things I noticed, was all the parallels between.
That's gonna be a running theme. Like, how many protagonists? This is just Lovecraft, isn't it?
He really does like to insert himself into his stories. It was. I was like, wow, this is just about you, isn't it, buddy? This is just you. This is just stuff that you did when you were growing up. You're some weirdo that just liked to float around graveyards and forests.
What are you doing, Howard? I'm just checking out the tombstones. You know, what's the big deal? No, I've talked about the racism thing before. I think I've even made videos on it. It's the most irrelevant thing in the world. And you would be hard pressed to find a creator, like a notable writer, who didn't have some kind of bigotry, right. Or, I mean, like, all of these guys.
That's the way it is. That's the way it is in any medium.
I find it annoying that Lovecraft gets singled out so much.
Yeah,
and the rest of these guys just skate by, and like if someone's making the billionth Dr. Seuss adaptation, no one's like, oh, I can't expose my children to this racism.
Yeah.
No one, like...
Yeah, so nobody thinks that.
When people are like, oh, I made this Lovecraft thing. Oh, you're just normalizing racism. Really? Because it's like a totally niche genre still.
Yeah.
It's popular now among a certain demographic, but it's not Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
It's not Roald Dahl. It's not Lewis Carroll. So where's the condemnation, the widespread, completely biased, like single-targeted condemnation for these other things? Why is it every time we talk about Lovecraft, I need a lecture about why racism is bad? I know that racism is bad. Don't talk to me like a child, you know?
Exactly. And in fact, the student I was arguing with I think he was just mostly arguing with me for the sake of it, maybe. But yeah, he was just like, why shouldn't we take his racism? No, like, why shouldn't we account for that? I'm like, because we don't really need to. It's been done to death. Everybody knows what kind of a person he was, but that's not why they read Lovecraft.
It's not an element of the fandom.
Yeah, like nobody thinks to themselves, oh man, this is such a hateful, bigoted man. He was just a man. Like,
You know, his stories were pretty crap, but the thing he said about the Spix, that's what got me into all
yeah,
this.
Right? Like, you know, it's just, and like, yeah, it does reflect a bit in his writing, but you know what? It's just, if you were to just remove any problematic artist of any kind in any medium from art in general, literature, whatever it might be, you wouldn't have anybody left.
Yeah, pretty much.
I can't think of any. I can't think, like, everybody's always complaining about people in the video game industry doing this and doing that. A lot of people in STEM fields even get a bad rep for being like touchy or being a little bit racist with their views when in private or whatever. Like, you're never going to find anybody that's ever accomplished anything like that isn't like problematic in some way, so why worry about it?
It's intellectually insulting, because what if part of me is interested in hearing from this perspective? Like,
Yeah.
is it not like, it's like people don't trust my agency or anyone else's agency in the
Yeah.
fandom. Racists are people too.
Yeah.
Racists can write interesting, good stories, and
Yeah.
you need to, if you want to be part of this species, you need to accept that that is a possibility. And
I don't know
if I'm going to read, you can't just assume that if I read this story, I will become a racist. No, I'm just reading it as a story. Yeah, maybe, and I'm sure we'll discuss things as we go along that have been debated here and there. Well, was this a reference to this unfair racial stereotype? Yeah, maybe. And there's a lot of room for that discussion, but I don't like the discussion when it's had in the context of, that's why we need to censor this. That's why we need to ban this. That's why we need to ignore this. This is an important part of American fiction. It cannot be ignored. It is the bedrock of science fiction, horror, fantasy. You can't do away with it. If you remove it, the genre just collapses in on itself.
Yeah, I hear a lot of I see a lot of that those same criticisms being levied against other writers of around the same time period too. It's not just Lovecraft, obviously. A lot of even anti-racist, or for their day anti-racist writers, like Mark Twain, gets a lot of shit for his racial language.
Mm-hmm.
But he was,
and I always thought that was bullshit. He would get banned from libraries, and it's like, yeah, he's using, as far as I could tell, a lot of it was he's using his Huckleberry Finn is not Mein Kampf, guys.
Right.
He's using the language of the area and of the time period. Guess what? People used to talk like that pretty openly. Get fucking used to the idea. Like, again, that's a part of history. Learn to, this is a Western problem. This is an American problem. Learn to deal with your history. There's going to be things you don't like, and your feelings are not going to be prioritized over historical preservation.
Yeah. That's you see a lot of that shit. A lot of historical revisionist shit. It happens on the right too, but man, it's pretty virulent in left-leaning circles at the moment. And then with love, I guess forgot what I was going to say earlier. There's a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions that does a bit of Lovecraft stuff from time to time. And they went over his history, just like his life and like why he was the way he was. And so they really help. I really enjoy their content, and they really helped put in perspective just what kind of man he really was, and like just how he was racist, but he did a lot for everybody, and he did a lot for everybody like that's in this type of writing, that anybody that's doing sci-fi, anything remotely related to science fiction or even science fantasy. He's just had such a huge impact, and really the man was he was so afraid of everything outside of his house that it really didn't matter. He was afraid of the ocean, and he lived next to it. Like,
he was the most antisocial person.
Yeah, he was incredibly antisocial. He probably even had a few. You might have had a few other mental illnesses too, hallucinations and stuff. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
those types of people are usually the most brilliant when it comes to like poetry and writing. It seems like Edgar Allan Poe had similar antisocial issues near the end of his life. Like a lot of people, a lot of the best writers in American history were incredibly problematic in some way or another. So there's no point in singling out Lovecraft for anything.
There's just no point in general. Like if that's what you're doing with your life is bitching about a guy who's dead, like this guy existed 100 years ago and was racist. Does anyone care? Like no one. He didn't kill anyone. He's a guy who wrote goofy little books.
Yeah,
it doesn't need to be. It's annoying. I commented on this recently because that Call of Cthulhu game came out, which isn't an adaptation of Call of Cthulhu, but I rest my case. It's just called Cthulhu, so because people will buy it. But basically, there were these articles coming out that like, this is a good chance to not even talk about the game, but to talk about what the game is based on, and of course that came from this racist guy. And I kid you not, one of these articles, is one of the most clickbait things I've ever seen. It doesn't go into any of the details of this game. There's a lot to complain about that game. So if you want to have a review, by all means, but to use it as a platform just to be this far left activist who's going to be bitching about this and they act like they're discovering something new. That is right. That's what gets to me. Everyone knows this. Everyone in the fandom is aware of this. No one endorses what he said about immigrants or anything like that. But to act like you fucking discovered the lost city of gold, like, man, this guy was a racist. Yeah, thanks, Einstein.
We know,
and we don't care.
Exactly.
You're not like some automatically saintly person because you condemned the dead racists. Like, it's not good enough anymore. You need to actually write, how about let it be? Write about the game. Do your fucking job. Don't, because there are so many people who would kill for that kind of job. Oh, I'm going to write articles about video games. And you use your platform for irrelevant garbage?
Exactly. That's another thing that really that's something that bothers me about game journalism in general. Is when you're getting paid to like play video games every day, man, like I wish I could do that. You know what I mean? Because I already play video games.
How could you ever have anything to complain about if that's your
exactly job? Like, why would you like? I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand how you can like just use such a cushy position to like. I don't know. I don't get it either. There's a lot.
It's like
there's a lot of bullshit that goes on in video games.
They discover what the game was based on, and we all have to deal with how uncomfortable they are. They're like, "Oh God, this like, guys, this really bothered me." It's like, you're a snowflake. I don't care what bothers you.
Exactly.
Just play the goddamn game and write about it. Like. Okay, yeah, it was based on something supposedly racist. Did you read a similar review when they remade Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Because that was based on the writings of an anti-Semite. We could do this all day. It's tiresome.
It really is.
No one cares. No one who's a fan of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, by and large, is an anti-Semite. And see, when I say it like that, it's ridiculous. But people will seriously suggest they'll treat the Lovecraft fandom like these trigger-happy jihadis who could become white supremacists at any given moment and march down the street with tiki torches. They're just waiting to be radicalized. It's insulting. We treat us with the same respect that any other fucking established fandom is treated with.
It's especially strange because anybody I know, and I realize this is anecdotal, but anybody I know that really enjoys the fandom is probably significantly less racist than anybody
yes
I've seen outside of it so far. It's like, yeah, it's okay because we're all existential nihilists anyway, so nobody really cares. We can do it like, I don't know. It's just if you're going to the Lovecraft book readings, you're not going to see a whole lot of guys in hoods,
Yeah. It doesn't happen. You go to these conventions, these are the most harmless, like Cthulhu cosplayers, the most harmless motherfuckers in the world. There's not a racist bone in any of these people's bodies. So, yes, we get it. We get it. He said questionable things 100 years ago. And those are not that's not the reason why we're fans. And you know, the sad thing is, doing this kind of show, we're going to have to talk about this again.
Yeah, we are. This is probably going to come up quite a bit, actually.
I'm going to have like 50 rants about this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure there's going to be like another, when this next game comes out, there's going to be a similar article. When Guillermo del Toro's movie comes out, there'll be 50 articles. Yeah. When the Nicolas Cage movie comes out, there'll be another article.
Yep.
And that's all that, you know, they could talk about the interesting, you know, these are differences with the adaptation. No, they're going to talk about that, and we all know it.
Yep. And this is a trend that's been going on forever. I'm pretty sure if I were to look back at Bloodborne articles when that game came out, there'd be all kinds of shit.
A game that's not even an adaptation, it's just based on it. It's an homage, and people are writing articles for that.
Yeah. No, I don't doubt it. They did similar stuff, and let's see, they added Lovecraftian eldritch creatures and StarCraft to the creator gods are eldritch creatures from beyond space and time or whatever. Like, I remember there was an article about that, giving them flack for that decision. But it's just you can't, because outside of religion, Lovecraft is among the first people to like treat these types of concepts in a fantasy setting and breaking them away from the religious bonds that shackle them and the dogmas that shackle them. So like the only person that did this before him was Lord Dunsany, and his stuff was pretty tame compared to a lot of the stuff that Lovecraft and the people that wrote after him came up with. And like you see a lot of Dunsany too, and we'll probably bring him up because H.P. Lovecraft took a lot from Lord Dunsany. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever played the video game Katamari Damacy.
I have not.
Okay. So in Katamari Damacy, it came out for the GameCube. It's a game where you play as this little guy and you roll up items. You just roll them up into a ball. That's what you do. That's what the entire game is about. And you keep rolling up bigger and bigger item balls, and then you turn them into stars. And you do this on behest of your king, who's the king of the cosmos or whatever. And he is that character is based off of the being that Lord Dunsany came up with called Mana Yud Sushai. And so this whole, there's a trope that Lovecraft actually made super popular, but he borrowed it from Lord Dunsany. The sleeping god is responsible for all of creation trope. Mm-hmm.
Well, that gets into the namesake of the show.
Right. So Azathoth, or at least Lovecraft's rendition of him, is just a more demonic, like messed up version of Mana Yud Sushai from Lord Dunsany's Gods of Pagana.
And it's a good lesson for writers because you're going to use tropes.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what you try.
Yeah.
But
and there's no, this is what bothered me
with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what bothered me of I think, Anita Sarkeesian's like video game critiques. She relied heavily on, she relied way too heavily, I think, in a lot of her critiques, involving like the use of tropes. She kind of makes it seem like using any kind of trope is bad. And that's not true. If a trope is used well, then there's nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm. It's a way for lazy critics to make a problem seem bigger than it actually is.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
And it's a lot of people do it. It's not just Sarkeesian. It's a lot of people who want to stick their noses up and say, they'll poo-poo this whole thing like, oh my god, he stole ideas from other writers. Steal is a very, that's a strong word. Well, these ideas were borrowed and were used quite respectfully, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and what they always told me in writing class was, we always stand upon the shoulders of giants. Originality is overrated. Creativity is important, but mostly just do what comes to you naturally. I don't know any other advice for any writers I could give other than that, I guess.
It's a vital piece of advice, though.
Yeah,
and
it really is.
We mentioned these movies that were kind of halting the initial production of Guillermo del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness, that being The Thing, 2011, and Prometheus. But I would never say that those franchises stole, basically as if to imply that they are completely plagiaristic works that are without merit. Yeah, they took influence like everything else.
Right.
Lovecraft took influence from Poe and from Dunsany.
Exactly.
So you can't, and they took influence from other people. So you can't. It goes back forever. And,
exactly.
I'm sure we could go back and we could find some fucking Neanderthal who had the first original idea. Like that's the real fandom to be a part of.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's tiresome and it's lazy critiquing.
It really is.
And I'm interested, going through this, to not be like that guy, to see how Lovecraft's writing grows. And then to maybe go back and explore some of these influences. I think that would be a really fulfilling experience. Like to see, oh, that's where he got the idea for Azathoth, like you just pointed out. That's where he got the idea for this. Or that's at least in part where he got the idea for this. And it's not something to shake a finger at and be like, oh my god, you plagiarists. No, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we had a pretty good opening discussion, and we should probably get into the review of the tomb.
So this is the segment where we review a specific Lovecraft story, and because we decided to take this chronologically, we're starting with Lovecraft's first published story, which is The Tomb.
First published, sort of, in a way, one that he was seeking out to,
right?
And, maybe we'll go back to some of the earlier stuff, but a lot of it is lost or incomplete, and it's juvenile writing.
Yeah, a lot of his earlier stuff certainly is his worst. So this is probably still, like, I enjoyed listening to this today. So or the last few days.
Oh, for sure.
We've been doing this. Okay, so the story, it starts, the character, Jarvis Dudley is his name, I believe, is how it's pronounced. he admits right away at the beginning of the tale that you might not find the stuff he says believable because he's in an insane asylum, and he's kind of trapped in a cell. And the story plays off, obviously, from Jarvis's point of view. He's the one telling the story. Kind of plays off in a way like he's being interviewed, perhaps.
Which is kind of that's something that we're going to see thematically a lot in Lovecraft's works. Oftentimes, the narrative is different than what a lot of people are used to. It's going to be someone describing events or describing something they went through. And like it's very unique to this medium.
Yeah, I agree. There's a specific line that stood out to me. I'm probably paraphrasing here a bit because I didn't write it down. I should have. But he talks about, and this is early on in the story. He talks about how the insane kind of goes on about how the insane like really just see differently, not necessarily inaccurately. He seems to really have disdain for like the normies, the people that don't see things the way that he does, or things that see things. He prefers crazy people, I think, to normal people.
Under these accusations of people obviously calling him crazy and putting him in the mental institution, his response seemed to be, "Oh, but intelligent people know that there's no difference between reality and non-reality," and it's exactly like, well, you're not really making the best case for yourself, are you, my dude?
And he even goes on to say he's not making the best case for himself. Like,
yeah,
you're probably not going to believe me. You're probably not going to believe a damn thing I say because I'm nuts. But yeah, crazy people are superior to you normie fucks.
and as we pointed out in the previous segment, Jervis is very much a Howard Lovecraft,
very
avatar.
Very much is. Like, I was just like, why didn't you just write yourself into this?
Pretty much.
He grew up, from a well-to-do New England family. Spent all of his time either upstairs in his attic reading books, or he's out in the woods exploring. And
yeah, gee, this sounds familiar.
Yeah, just like so many other New English boys in the 1920s getting into trouble. He talks about how he interacts with the dryads of the wood, and there's some poetic language in there, obviously, but it definitely gives you a clue into his mindset as far as like the spiritual is concerned. And
I thought something interesting about this, and sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
But I think it would be better if we just kind of do the play off each other. But there's kind of a debate about what is considered part of the mythos. I mean, that might even be its own show at some point, because it is there is a lot of contention and it's complicated. But and this is not one that's usually included, but there were a couple things that stood out to me that could very easily make it part of the mythos in some degree. So again, you're right. He mentions reading all of these very strange books in his childhood, and you have to wonder what some of those books might have been. Maybe a Necronomicon thrown in there somewhere.
Oh, he goes even further. He says that what he reads in those books isn't what other people read in those books. That he gets something completely different out of the books that he reads.
That's another theme of this story. He seems to have an entirely different perception of reality, and it makes him an unreliable narrator if I've ever heard one.
He seems to make a point of it too. That's pretty.
When he sees the tomb later on, he mentions something about praying to, I don't remember the full context, but he was praying to the hundreds of gods of the grove.
The 100 gods of the grove.
And like normally you would expect a character of this background, I don't know, to pray to Jesus or something. It's kind of weird. It's another thing about this character. This is obviously it's an avatar for Lovecraft, but there's a lot of mysteries about this character. Like, you really have to wonder, what was this kid reading in those books?
Yeah,
Like what,
he
hundreds of
seems to.
gods of the grove?
Yeah, he seems to renovate a lot of almost pagan traditions in this story. So this character definitely seems like he'd be one of those people that maybe secretly believes in the old gods. Maybe he's secretly maybe believes in, I don't know, like the Olympians or something. Like, I don't know. This is one of those things where uh, Christianity tends to vilify these gods, so turning them into horror tropes is pretty popular, or
Yes.
used to be, especially around the time that Lovecraft was around. So that was something you would see a lot of. A lot of even now, like a lot of people like that practice Wicca and stuff get accused of like Lucifism, and like they're two completely distinct religions with like there's no Satan or sin or anything like that in Wicca. You know what I mean?
No, it's
Like,
completely, that is one religion trying to fit another religion into their understanding of the world.
right.
And no, I mean, and a lot of people who do that, honestly, who are into like witchcraft, a lot of them are trolling.
Yeah,
if
a
we're
lot
being
of
honest.
them. Yeah, it's true. A lot of them are just LARPing.
Because it pisses off their parents or it pisses off their classmates or whoever.
Well, yeah, it's a way to be edgy. It's a way to be unique.
I'm so edgy.
I'm so edgy.
I worship Gaia, motherfucker. Anyway.
Worship Poseidon. I don't know.
Please continue, sir.
Alright, so Jarvis spends most of his youth exploring the forest around his ancestral home. He becomes intimately familiar with the area and spends most of his time reading books in a particular hollow. At the age of 11, begins exploring deeper into the woods, and eventually comes upon the tomb that we mentioned, dedicated to a family called the Hydes.
Mm. Who is supposedly their line is ended,
right?
But there might be some, and we'll get into that later. There might be some distant relations,
right.
But the direct descendants are dead.
Right. Yeah, I have written here. It's an old lineage, the last member of which died decades before Jarvis's birth, and that's important to bring up too later. There's I brought up the mansion. There's a burned down mansion that this family used to live in on the way through the tomb, and we'll talk about this more later since it's so important to the end of the story. And as Jarvis grows up, he learns everything that he can, mostly from his parents and their superstitious talking to each other, mostly. I think they're not really including him in the conversation. He just kind of listens in. Seems like his parents were probably a superstitious bunch. They had lots of like horror stories about the place, about that old mansion to tell.
Throwing salt over their shoulders, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think it should also be mentioned that when it comes to the Hyde lineage, the implication is that the last descendant died in the burned down mansion.
Yep.
And we'll get back to that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. Anything you want to add, just go right ahead.
Well, thank you.
I grant you permission.
Permission to speak granted.
So let's see here. What else do I have? So by the Jarvis actually kind of leaves the tomb alone after that. Something in one of the books he reads says that gives him the idea that he's just too young to get into the tomb yet. So there's no point in like messing with it.
It's Plutarch's Lives.
Yeah, that was
getting on the wiki. I think it's Greek philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because he had a lot of all that type of stuff in the library. Lots of old tomes and stuff. He doesn't even go over all of it, obviously. But when he turns 21, eventually he begins spending more time at the tomb. and eventually one night while he's visiting it, finds a key in his attic that fits the lock on the door, which is interesting.
Almost
Because,
like he was given a vision of exactly
yeah,
where to find it.
yeah. He finds it wrapped up in an old book, I think. An old dusty tomb that he can't read. And this thing allows him entry into the tomb, which he then takes the time to explore. And he ends up spending almost every night in that tomb, eventually. He doesn't go. He doesn't
and he
explain everything in
specifically
detail.
sleeps in one of the coffins that's empty.
Yep. After he does some exploring, in fact, he goes out of his way to leave the more sordid details out. He calls a lot of what his dealings with the dead. He doesn't really say exactly everything he does in the tomb,
Which is so much worse.
Yeah, it really is.
It's something that makes this, like, you couldn't adapt this, basically,
Yeah.
because it works in this medium. The narrator will say something to the effect of, "Oh, what was discussed in that tomb was too horrible, beyond human comprehension." It's
Yeah.
like, actually, I think I'm good not knowing. You carry on, little Jervis.
So what's fascinating is he eventually does find an empty tomb, and it's not or an empty coffin. And not only is it empty, but it has his name carved into it,
which we don't learn until the very end.
Right. And let's see here. I lost my spot.
That would be the creepiest experience possible. You wander into an old mausoleum and you see an empty coffin with your name on it.
But what's really interesting is Jarvis seems to appreciate this.
Because he's a freak.
His excursions eventually lead to changes in his personality, which he notes where once before he was withdrawn and antisocial, he's become loud, crass, and arrogant. He uses language like unbecoming of one of his lineage or stature. He also develops...
He knows things that he shouldn't know.
Yeah, he knows things about other people that he shouldn't, and he knows he's aware of things that he shouldn't be aware of. And it's interesting because it's almost like it's almost implied that he's like some reincarnated version of the guy that died in the house.
Yes. I definitely picked up on that too. There was something, actually, this was the part that I wanted to read. So it's around this point when it seems like he's getting possessed by this person from a completely different time period with a completely different articulation and just the way they talk. And he randomly belts out in this poem. I thought this was one of the best parts. I'm just going to read it because it's fantastic. And it is, again, this is pure Lovecraft. This could only work in this medium, and we'll get all into that. So he says, "Come hither, my lads, with your tankards of ale, and drink to the present before it shall fail. Pile each on your platter a mountain of beef, for 'tis eating and drinking that brings us relief. So fill up your glasses, for life will soon pass. When you're dead, you'll ne'er drink to your king or your lass. Anacreon had a red nose, so they say. So what's a red nose if you're happy and gay? Gad split me, I'd rather be red while I'm here than white as a lily and dead half a year. So Betty, my miss, come give me a kiss. And hell, there's no innkeeper's daughter like this." Young Harry, propped up just as straight as he's able, will soon lose his wig and sip under the table. But fill up your goblets and pass 'em around, better under the table than under the ground. So revel and chaff as ye thirstily quaff. Under 6 feet of dirt, 'tis less easy to laugh. The fiend strike me blue, I'm scarce able to walk, and damn me if I can stand upright or talk. Here, landlord, bid Betty to summon a chair. I'll try home for a while, for my wife is not there. So lend me a hand, I'm not able to stand, but I'm gay whilst I linger on top of the land. So this stood out to me because he's obviously saying this very out of character, just like randomly at the dinner table or something.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things that the way it's described, I can only really see working as well as it does in this medium. Just the way, because if someone did it in a movie, I don't think it would have the same effect. Really. Yeah. It's the description here, because and this is kind of a side of Lovecraft you don't see much. It's kind of humorous, which I like. Some of his stories that we're going to get into are not really so much horror and are more fantastical. Mm-hmm. So we'll get that slant, but this is very different. But on top of being funny, it's also extremely creepy in a way, because it would be like if you knew someone, an intimate family member, and they started just talking in a way you could hear it was not them. There was something severely off, and they were talking like someone who shouldn't even be in this time period.
Yeah.
And it's funny to this is a story written in like 1919, and it's funny to have Lovecraft write, this is a behind the times dialect, because of course now his dialect is behind the times by pretty much the same amount of time.
Yep.
And that's really interesting. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on that section in particular?
Well, I thought the whole possession arc was interesting, because he seems fully aware of the change in himself, but he embraces it almost like this was something he was always meant to do. And
lends credence to your theory.
Yeah, it what really fascinated me was when they get to the point was just after that, when they decide it's the night that he's subdued, the night that he goes into the mansion. That was probably one of the more fascinating parts for me, because up until that point, he was completely enraptured with the tomb. This was his first time ever really paying much attention to the burnt out old mansion ruin. But he's beckoned to come in, and then he walks into the ruin and goes through some trees, and then comes out the other side, and there's the mansion whole, and everybody's there, and they're all partying, and there are people there that he even knows, like he recognizes people, and some of them are like, they're younger, obviously, but
did you catch his description of how he recognized them?
Yeah,
he recognizes their decomposing corpses, and he's like, "Oh, that person seems familiar. Oh yeah, now you have skin.
Yeah, now you have skin. Oh yeah. I talk to you all the time. You're that dead guy.
You're the dead corpse I talk to every night."
Yeah, and then he goes through the entire mansion burning down, but he doesn't actually see the host of the party is who he's searching for, but I don't know that he ever finds it.
And that's because he is supposed to be the host.
Correct.
He gets this feeling when he's outside mingling with the guests that it's even said he feels like he should be talking to the host. He feels like he belongs inside. And so that's where he goes. But then what happened?
There's a crack of lightning, and the fire spreads, and pretty soon everybody's in the building with him, and they're all dead. Everybody dies. Everybody that's in the building dies, including him. And he's freaked because his body's turned to ash, and was searching for a way to get back. So
it's one of the. I mean, obviously we've had indications that this guy's crazy. Yeah, but it's a truly disturbing moment, because you would think in most other contexts, in any other story, if someone were being burnt alive, obviously he's afraid of the fire. And that's something else we didn't mention, because when he starts taking on these mannerisms of past people, he also takes on a fear of thunderstorms and fire. That he can't explain it until this
he never
happens.
Used to have it until thunderstorms, fire, and rain. Yeah.
So obviously he's afraid of the fire while the mansion's being burned down again, but he he takes a moment. His most existential fear is that if my body is turned to ash and scattered by the wind, they won't be able to lay me in my coffin.
Yeah.
And that is so creepy.
And they even mention that the last person to be put in that coffin was cremated, and so they just put the urn in the tomb. They might not have given him a coffin.
And I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be the host of this party.
Yeah,
who
exactly.
burned, obviously burned alive and turned to ash. And, well, you can have a coffin for them, but you don't really have much of a body to put in there.
Yeah.
But anyway, what happens after that?
That's the night that he's dragged away. He gets cornered by his father and a couple of guys from the asylum, and they drag him off. His family basically pleads for them not to hurt him. There's a big, like a confrontation kind of sorts. They explain that his family and a lot of his neighbors have been watching him for the entire time he's been going to the tomb, and that he's never actually been inside, that he just stands there kind of, I guess, every night.
And this was alluded to earlier because of the thing you mentioned about him reading the books and seeing different things.
Yeah. It's alluded to quite a bit. This is why I had to re-listen to the story so many times.
Yes, I did too.
Just so I could tell where his perception was skewed and where everybody else's maybe. And it's funny because he even goes on and says, well, through some magic, they don't know that I'm entering the tomb. They don't know that I'm going down in there every night and sleeping in that coffin.
he's
I'm
such
out there
a
on the
quirk.
grass.
He's such a quirk. He thinks that he has invisibility powers.
Yeah, he's he reminds me a lot of your typical flat earther, you know what I mean? He thinks he has some kind of secret knowledge that nobody else is privy to, but everybody else just thinks he's crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. And I felt bad that it was only upon, one of the more recent times I listened to it, I understood why the coffin was empty. I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. But, I think that goes to say that, yeah, it's a short story and it's really early on in his career, but there's a lot going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even the kind of story that he would do all the time.
Yeah.
I'll get into that definitely more later, but yeah, this is just kind of a one-off little story he did. But it's not it wasn't just an excuse to have something shocking or to have something bloody. No, he really wanted to go out of his way with this story to disturb readers. And it worked. It worked 100 years later, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it worked on me. Especially because I really like this, the psychological horror stuff. And so, maybe his perception is skewed, or maybe it is everybody else that's being fooled. It's hard to tell with this story.
Yeah, they leave it open-ended. You can really take either interpretation, and I am split. I don't know if either he's crazy or this is some kind of possession reincarnation that he is the only one who's privy to.
Yeah, and there's even, when they finally tackle him and get him away from the area, he's found carrying a box, and in this box is a little figurine that looks just like him, but it has the initials JH instead of JD, which leads me to believe that if he's not that maybe he's an adopted direct descendant of the Hydes, or maybe his family is just a distant relation since the tomb's so close to his property. I'm not sure though. It leaves a lot.
And they mentioned something else about that figurine that kind of, it's a clue, but it's not a very helpful clue in determining what actually happened, because he says that he specifically sees a lot lot of himself in the figurine. Maybe it looks like not him at all. We don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe this is wishful thinking.
Yeah. So this is one of those stories that really
It's a
that really,
mind fuck. It's an absolute mind fuck.
It really is. He does a really good job at displaying just how different perceptions can really just yeah, it is. It's just that's a good way of putting it. Mindfuck.
I like the ending because he says something along the lines of he was going to accept that based on logic and just all of what everyone's telling him, including his father, that he's insane, that he's suffering from some mental delusion. But at the very last minute, he asks his servant to go and investigate the tomb, and he has to open it up, and he has to break through the lock. Which has supposedly not been touched, according to all these people.
According to his dad, it hasn't been touched in 50 years.
And when he goes down there, this is when we discover that the name on the empty coffin was Jervis.
Yep.
And that's why he says, I need to write this. I need my side of the story because I thought I was crazy. Maybe you have every reason to think I am crazy, but there's something more going on here. Yeah, and that's where they leave us.
Yeah. And his last line is, "I'm so excited." And I'm obviously paraphrasing here again, but he says he's excited because he's going to get buried when he dies. They're going to bury him in that tomb. He says, in the book, he's like, "Yeah, they're going to bury me there. Finally, I'm so excited." It's ridiculous.
There's just something inherently disturbing about characters who relish their own death. It's just so off-putting and so alien. And it was a very, I don't know, this is a very different story. I guess we can get into more general thoughts about the story as a whole, but it's a very different story than what I'm used to. But I do see elements that are going to make returns. I think this story is actually kind of in some ways a prototype for the first story I read, The Rats in the Walls. In terms of, there's some elements about, legacy and ancestry. That's another thing that Lovecraft likes to mess around with.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot of that. But, no, it's, I can say that if there's something that binds all the stories together, there's always the moment where you just kind of involuntarily shudder. Just like, no, thank you.
Yeah, he's definitely great at evoking that in people. It's one of my favorite aspects of his writing.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any just kind of miscellaneous notes about the story?
No, we pretty much covered what I've got written here. I probably should have opened the Wikipedia article.
I've got it. It pretty much we pretty much did, and I actually really like the way we covered it because I think that we went pretty in depth.
Yeah, I think so too.
There's a couple things that are interesting on here about other media. I've actually heard about this. So there's a band that's called the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. They take their name from the story. I have heard of that band, and that's kind of that's near the beginning, the description of like something along the lines of, beyond the darkest of the hillside thickets is the tomb, is the mausoleum. And this is okay. So this is funny. This is what it says verbatim. A 2007 film was released to DVD with no ties whatsoever to the short story, despite it being promoted as H.P. Lovecraft's The Tomb. The movie's plot was similar to the Saw series of horror films.
Huh.
What the fuck?
Now I'm going to have to look for that movie and watch it.
Now we're going to have to review that movie, unfortunately.
Yeah, we are.
Oh my god.
I'm probably going to hate it.
It's literally called H.P. Lovecraft's The Tomb, and supposedly has nothing to do with H.P. Lovecraft's The Tomb.
Wouldn't be the first time.
And it's similar to Saw? Good lord.
That's really disappointing.
These are two aspects of horror that should never come in contact with one another. Like this story is psychological horror that's effective 100 years later, Saw is pretentious psychological horror that doesn't even work and has always been about gore more than anything.
It's definitely like I didn't even hate the first Saw film. I actually thought it was fairly decent. But
Yeah,
every film after that is just the same film. And there's only so many times that you can like cut someone up into pieces or have them stick their hand in a box full of needles, or I don't know. A lot of it was just gratuitous violence for violence's sake. Lovecraft has always been more about the crazy
and the
just
mystery and
yeah,
building an engrossing narrative,
yeah.
and the fact that there is a supposed adaptation that's probably just some piece of shit torture porn exploitation made on a shoestring budget piece of garbage is disappointing. Like, really?
Yeah.
And granted, I don't want to see this adapted because I don't
No.
think it would be as good. It couldn't be.
No, it couldn't be. It's just it would be hard enough as it is because adapting anything to film from almost any other medium is a challenge.
And some of them work better than others. I think that if their best bet is At the Mountains of Madness in terms of an actual story that would work well as a film.
No, I completely agree with you there. There are several short stories that would make excellent films if done correctly. The key is doing them correctly, and that's not something you see a lot of, regardless of whatever's being adapted. Or adapting a Akira movie that's supposed to come out this year, and they're going to ruin it.
Well, it's an anime movie.
I mean, but there's a lot of cultural connotations that go into that film. It's actually very important to the Japanese for a long list of reasons. So it's a commentary about Japanese society post World War II and post being nuked. So
much like Godzilla.
Yeah, and they're putting it in Manhattan instead of Tokyo. That's the first big thing that's got everybody pissed off. And it's like, if you're not gonna like, and then they're probably gonna like hire a bunch of white people for the actors. And while I normally don't care about the whole like representation in film shit, like I normally don't give two fucks. But if it's something with this much,
it doesn't make sense. It's like when they tried to make Goku white. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, well, like there's no reason to do it. Is the thing. It's like you can film in Tokyo. You don't have to film in Manhattan, and you can use CGI to make up the rest. So I don't understand why this is so difficult for people to do. And
what's the point of even doing an adaptation?
Yeah, that's what bothers me. Is especially with stuff like anime, because the source material is so easily accessible and so easy to mess with, and you can probably even change a lot of what you want, and still keep the fans relatively happy. But I don't know. Just Hollywood tends to fuck things up more often than not, and I'm always a little leery about any kind of adaptation. So.
If you think Hollywood's bad, clearly the underground movie scene is no better with this one.
Yeah,
it has no ties at all. It's like it has nothing to do. Apparently, now we do need to investigate it. We need to be the judge, the quality judges of this, because no. That's borderline fraudulent. How do you even get away with that? This is not, like, you shouldn't be able to call it like so and so presents this film. I hate that in general anyway. Like, I hate it. Like, they did that, like, Dr. Seuss's The Grinch. Dr. Seuss did not approve this movie, you hacks.
He probably wouldn't have approved of it either.
He would have said this sucks.
No, the Jim Carrey Grinch was the best adaptation of The Grinch I've ever seen. And I don't even know if Dr. Seuss would have liked it. He probably wouldn't have. I don't think he would have wanted any of his books made into films, but it's like, that was like, but I guess that was an era where like that was before the writer's strike, so like there were competent people in Hollywood calling some of the shots, but now it's just
there's been a lot of writer strikes.
Yeah, no, this was the big one though. Like back in like 2010, they lost like 30,000 writers. Everybody in the industry had like left.
So supposedly that was also what Michael Bay blamed why the second Transformers movie was bad. He was like, "Oh yeah, there was a writer's strike." Well, it's like, how about you wait for the writer's strike to be over? So, douchebag.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh yeah, it's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. How fucking convenient. Anyway, we've totally gone off topic.
Yeah, we have, but that's fine. I think we've covered about everything for this particular podcast.
Do you have a preference for the final interpretation? Do you think he is gun to your head? Do you think he's crazy, or do you think what he's seeing is legit?
I like to think that what he's seeing is legit, but I like that supernatural stuff. So I would definitely leave that up to the interpretation of the reader. But I definitely like to think that maybe there's something to him being able to get in and out of there without anybody knowing it.
Mm. It's interesting because they set up all these things that would make you think, yeah, he is insane. Yeah. But, you know, based on the final revelation of his servant, it seems far too coincidental that there was also a Jervis.
Yeah.
Who has the empty tomb. It's like, well, if he's describing things that are in a supposedly sealed tomb, maybe he's actually been in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe, that was maybe he is crazy. Yeah, maybe he is. People should leave feedback. Let us know what you think happened in this story. But yeah, I think we did cover it pretty thoroughly. This was good. It remains to be seen what we will be doing next time. We obviously have a lot of directions we could go in. There's still a long list of stories to go just for Lovecraft. Never mind his collaborations. Never mind any of these other people. Maybe we'll review that shitty movie. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we'll get around to it eventually.
How about not next time?
Yeah, not next time. We'll leave that for later.
Let's get a few positive things under our belt before we delve to those depths.
Sounds good to me.
But of course, you can leave feedback. For now, I'll work on getting some kind of email. For now, just leave feedback in the comments section. And next episode, we should have a segment dedicated to reading longer comments, questions, death threats, love letters, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yeah, as we get going with this, as people start watching, we'll definitely start interacting with everybody. So do all that good stuff.
For sure.
Comments and stuff.
And he's Zach, and I'm Maurice, and this has been the Court of Azathoth. See you next time.
See you next time, everybody.